Hello, whoa. Hello everyone, it's Leah, and welcome to another Thrift Flip cosplay. I have been having so much fun going to thrift stores, finding pieces of clothing that are reminiscent of characters that I love, and modifying them to create unique cosplays. And if you haven't figured it out yet from the lovely cosplay behind me, today we are working on Aerith from Final Fantasy VII. And if you're enjoying the content on this channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you don't miss an upload. Now let's get into this cosplay tutorial. For this cosplay, we are going to be tackling Aerith's jacket, her dress, and her bow. So if there's anything specific you're looking for in this cosplay tutorial, check the chapters down below, skip around to what you want to see, or settle down and come along for the entire ride of this tutorial, starting with hitting up the thrift store. Okay, so as soon as I got to this thrift store, I saw so many good red jacket options, and I knew we were in business. I was hoping to make this a one thrift store trip, and I succeeded. Some of the red jackets I didn't end up bringing into the dressing room, like this jacket. I really love the shape of it, but the zipper was silver, and I knew we were going for gold with this cosplay. And this jacket here, the right color, but it was too thick, which would make it difficult to cut. I also noticed some jackets had a lot of repairs that needed to be done, like this jacket here, a lot of broken seams and just like extra work I didn't want to do. But I really liked these buttons, so I still wanted to try this jacket on. Before we went into the dressing room, I checked out the dresses. This one was the right color, but I thought it was gonna fit like a bodycon, and that wasn't the style I was going for. I wanted something like this that was a separate top and bottom to give an A-line feel, though this color wasn't really correct, but something like this dress would work really well, especially if I was going to lean more towards Aerith from the original Final Fantasy VII. I was also contemplating buying this white dress just for the ruffle on the bottom, but decided against it. That would be more in the style of Aerith from the remake Final Fantasy VII. And ultimately, I only brought this dress and two of the jackets into the changing room. This jacket was way too small, and it was the one that needed a lot of repairs, so in the end I went with this blazer. It fit me really well. I could picture how it would look when it was cropped. I also looked at a few different options for shoes. I needed something brown, maybe something with gold adornments, and this is the pair I ended up buying. We are in a very good position with these pieces I found at the thrift store. I bought 3 items: this red jacket, the pink dress, and the brown shoes on my feet. The shoes are perfect. I think they're a really fun design. I think they fit this character really well. I'm considering adding some sort of like slouchy sock with it, but I need to see what I have. But yeah, shoes are good. All that's done. The main focuses of this cosplay are going to be the dress, the jacket, and styling the wig, which I'm still waiting for in the mail. That's going to be fun. So let's talk through the modifications for both of these clothing items. We need to crop this jacket, which is going to give us a lot of extra red fabric. With that red fabric, we are going to make a belt to line the bottom of the jacket. We're going to be adding buckles, grommets, and rivets on various parts of this jacket in gold and bronze color, like on the sleeves, which are getting a very similar treatment to the bottom of the jacket, cropping them to the elbow, using the extra fabric to make a belt around the bottom of the sleeve, adding buckles, rivets, and grommets in gold and bronze. I also have to figure out what I'm doing with the buttons. I've got these red buttons in the front here. There's also red buttons on the sleeves. I don't think the red is really working for this. I think I need something better, but I don't really have a ton of button options. But I have some ideas of how I can make these red buttons work for the cosplay. There's also going to be some rivets on the collar. And yeah, that should be it for the jacket. And before we talk about the dress, circling back to the wig, some of the extra red fabric from this jacket is also going to be used to make a bow for the hair. And on to the dress. There's a couple different styles of Aerith, from the original artwork from the original Final Fantasy VII to what she looks like now in the Final Fantasy VII remake game. I'm leaning more towards the original drawing. The newer one had her in a very, very pale pink dress with some white ruffle on the bottom. I was considering going that route, but in the end I went for this more salmon colored dress which is reminiscent of her dress from the original artwork. That dress had buttons all down the front. I was going back and forth with this. Do I make the buttons real? Do I make the buttons fake? I've decided I'm making the buttons fake, partially because the top of this dress fits so well. So if I was gonna make the buttons real, I'd have to bring the dress in. If I bring the dress in, it's not gonna fit me anymore. So yeah, definitely down the front here, fake buttons. I have to look through my buttons and see what I have. I've put some aside, but that might actually be where these buttons come into play. Anyway, then for the bottom of the skirt, again, I'm going to do fake buttons, but I am planning on actually fully detaching the skirt, cutting it, and adding a panel that makes the buttons look real. Part of the reason I'm not doing real buttons on the bottom is because the buttonhole maker on my sewing machine is broken. So truthfully, the decision was made for me that I couldn't make the buttons real. But at least for the bottom of the skirt, I wanna construct it in a way that will give me the option to make the buttons real in the future if I wanted to. And also this skirt is sort of coming apart in a few places. If you see here, there's a lot of loose thread and there's a lot of space here. So even if I have to take the skirt in a little bit, there'll still be a lot of skirt left over. So we've got some fun changes for both of these clothing items. I'm going to start with the jacket. Let's get into it. I am the queen of the eyeballing method, so the first step for hemming this jacket was to put it on my dress form, fold up the excess fabric, clip a new length into place, and just make sure I like the way it lays on the dress form before I get to cutting. And then for the sleeves, I actually measured where I wanted this pin while the jacket was on me. That pin is marking the place just above my elbow, which is how long I want the sleeve to be. Again, we're just eyeballing, didn't really measure it, but I'm pretty good at the eyeball method and matching things specifically to my body. The next step was then to cut off all the excess fabric, starting with the sleeves. You only need to give yourself about a ½ inch of seam allowance. I gave a little bit more on this sleeve, but you can always cut more later. Then before I cut the excess fabric off of the length of the jacket, I seam ripped out these two buttons, which are going to come into play later. Then I cut off the excess fabric. I was a little messy with this line, but for me it was easier just to get as much of that excess off as possible, and I can clean up that hem a little bit later. And we're going to be closing off that open seam anyway and making the bottom of the jacket really, really nice and neat. So it doesn't matter so much if your cutting line is straight and even. The important thing is making sure that you have enough seam allowance. You can always cut more, you can never cut less. And now to hem the sleeves. We folded up that open seam on the sleeve to make it closed and neat like this. I will show you how I did it on the other sleeve. So you're just rolling that seam in on itself to prevent as much fraying as possible. This fabric was actually very easy to work with, but I had to make sure that that inner lining of the jacket, which is the red and white stripes, and the outer jacket were laying flush together so that the open seams on both layers get closed off. So that's going to be the inside of the jacket, and that's going to be the outside. So let's get that sewed into place. I have to say, I really enjoyed what the inner seam of this little trim looked like. It was unfortunate that it's being wasted on the inside of the jacket, but we're actually going to be using this method a little bit later when we're working on the dress, and that trim is actually going to be on the outside and it's going to get seen. We're adding straps and buckles to the bottom of the sleeve and to the bottom of the jacket anyway, so even if we put that cute little trim on the outside, it would not end up being seen. And we are now doing the same method for the bottom of the jacket. I pinned it off camera, but it was the same method where I rolled the two layers of fabric in on themselves so that the open seam is hidden to help prevent with any fraying. Again, I thought that this trim on the inside of the jacket looked so cute, it looks so neat, and I'm very excited to show you how I use it later on the dress. And this is what the jacket looks like after we finished hemming it. Now time to add all the adornments. Starting with the straps, one along the bottom of the jacket and two on the sleeves. These straps are going to have gold buckles and gold grommets. So this is the part of the process where I started running into some issues. I mean, for starters, this piece of fabric that I'm working with is so jagged, which I said before is totally fine. I folded the fabric in half and I'm pinning it together, and I'm going to use the pins as the guideline for where I'm going to sew, which is going to make the line straight. The issue is that this strap isn't long enough. This fabric I'm using came off the bottom of the jacket, which means it is only as wide as the jacket was. But the ends of a belt have to be able to overlap each other. This piece of fabric will not be long enough to make a belt that goes all the way around the bottom of this jacket and then overlaps in the front to be able to close with a buckle. And I ran into the same problem here when I made the straps to go around the bottom of the sleeves. They didn't end up being long enough. I'm going to show you how I made them and how I modified my plan when I realized it wasn't going to work. So I've shown how to make strips of fabrics many times in my cosplay tutorials, and this is one of my favorite ways, which is to lay two pieces of fabric on top of each other with the side you want on the outside on the inside. Because don't worry, once this is sewed together, we are going to flip it right side out. You're then going to sew seams along each side of the fabric. So now the pieces are sewed together, but the seams are on the outside, and the side we want facing out is right now on the inside. So the next step is to take a safety pin, pin it to one side of the fabric, and then use the safety pin to feed the fabric through the tube, which will turn it right side out. And then you can use an iron, but I actually usually use my straightener to flatten out these tubes of fabric so that they're nice and flat. You can use this method to make straps for a shirt, or like for this cosplay, you can use this method to make a sort of belt. This is when I realized that they were too short and I cut them down the middle. I've actually had this problem many times before. A lot of times in the past, I will add a piece of elastic in the back of the strap just to give it a little bit more room. That is not what we're going to do for this particular project. The truth is, none of these straps or belts that we're putting on this jacket are supposed to be functional. They're really just for an extra design element, which means that these don't have to be practical belts. They're just for show. They don't need to work. They just need to look good. So as you can see here, what I'm doing, just to help these straps hold their shape a little bit better, I'm adding seams all around the straps. This is a part of the project that's kind of like, don't look too close at my work. It's not too straight, but I do think it adds a little bit to these straps and makes them look a little bit neater and a little bit more professional. Also, while I was doing this portion of the cosplay, I was listening to a very good audiobook, and I had a very audible reaction that I thought was very funny and wanted to include.
What? Oh my god. That's so crazy.
If you like fantasy romance books, the book I was reading was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Don't feel like you ever need to take my book recommendations, but you should take my recommendation to get a library card because reading is fun. Anyway, back to the cosplay. So 3 of these straps are going to have buckles on them, and the other 3 straps are going to have grommet holes to feed the buckle through. And for the buckles that I have, you actually do need to add a grommet as well on the buckle side, which is what I'm showing you now. After those grommets are in all 3 of the straps, it's time to add on the buckle. And where I place these clips, I'm going to sew a line to hold the buckle in place. Now to add the grommet holes to the other 3 straps, I decided on 3 grommet holes each, and I tried to keep them straight and centered, but obviously I used the eyeball method, so it isn't the most precise, but I still think it looks good. Again, we are just going with the gold grommets, and that is what the finished product looks like. So as I said before, these are not functional straps. So the 2 straps that I'm putting on the sleeve, I'm actually going to sew them together. So you won't even be able to open this buckle at all. It's just gonna be one piece, and it's gonna keep it nice and tight and secure. Again, don't look too closely at it. Not the best execution, but you get the idea. And yeah, these straps are not going to go all the way around. They're just going to be fake buckles, fake straps that are only seen on the front. You can see there, I sewed down the strap along the bottom of the jacket and up the sides, so the only part that's open is the top seam. And I think leaving that top seam open is going to give the illusion that it's a workable strap, even though it's a fake strap. We're going to do something very similar to the front of the jacket. It's sewed down in the same way along the bottom, along the side, and it only goes a few inches into the jacket. It does not go all the way around. This one in the front is workable because unlike the sleeves, I want these two pieces to be separated. The cosplay calls for the jacket to be open. So it can work if you need it to, but I can't see myself ever actually closing the front strap. It really is just there for decoration. And again, it's nice and sturdy, seam closed along the bottom, along the side, leaving it open on the top, which makes it realistic. Final little details that we have to do. We are making some rivet holes in the collar, and we are going to add gold rivets. So we're going to have 4 in total. Rivets are another thing I've shown on my channel a lot. I think at this point, I am an expert at making belts. I think I'm an expert at putting rivets on cosplays. It's such a small little detail that adds so much professionalism, and it's something I try to utilize on my cosplays wherever I can. The last thing we need to add to this jacket is a button, which we're going to sew in a minute, but look at how that looks so far. This jacket looks amazing. I'm so happy with it, and I was really proud of myself that I didn't run into too many obstacles. Speaking of the buttons, the next thing that we are going to do is paint these buttons. I decided to paint them gold. As you see, there are 2 large buttons that came off the jacket and then 6 smaller buttons that came off the jacket sleeves. One of those large buttons is going to go back on the jacket. As I'm showing you here, you can actually see the holes where I seam ripped the button off. So I'm just going to put the button right back there. And the reason we're using one button instead of putting both buttons back on is because we hemmed it, the other buttonhole got cut off. So we are just going through the 4 holes in the jacket to make a crisscross pattern. That's what it looks like after 1 iteration. We are going to do about 5 loops for each diagonal. And with each pass through, 2 pieces of thread are being left behind. So in total, there will be 10 pieces of thread going through each diagonal button. And that's the jacket. Moving on to the dress. The first thing I needed to do with the dress was seam rip it. I originally said I was going to remove the entire bottom of the dress and re-sew it on. I decided to only seam rip the front part of the dress. It took me about 2 episodes of Fallout to finish seam ripping this, so I'm going to save you that very, very boring time lapse and just show you what it looks like when it's back on my body. When I put the dress back on, that's when I got the idea for a little bit of Leah customization. I love a crop top whenever I get a chance, so instead of sewing this dress back into one piece, I closed off the hem on the top of the dress, and I'm going to have like a little peekaboo moment in the front of this dress, showing off the abs a little bit. Again, we're using the eyeball method to find the center of this piece of fabric. We are pinning it just so I remember where that fold is. Then I took the dress off and I cut the fabric in half, and then I lined it up against my body to where the center of the dress is. I folded it, so actually the open seam will be on the outside of the dress. We did that with both pieces of fabric. And remember how I told you that really cute trim that we were seeing on the inside of the jacket was going to make an appearance on the outside of the dress? This is where that's going to happen. So we are closing off this seam in the exact same way that we did for the jacket. The only difference is that trim is going to be on the outside, which is going to give us this nice panel running down the front of the dress for us to put buttons on. While it was on my body, I really was just eyeballing it, but I did end up cutting off a good amount of excess fabric before I sewed anything down, which you can see here. I actually added a very similar panel to the top of the dress running down the front. Then I started measuring to see where I wanted to put the buttons. Originally, I had the first button about 1 inch down from the top of the dress, and from there I was putting 1.5 inches between the buttons. And you can see where I pinned the button placement down the front of the dress, and you can also now see the panel that I created to put the buttons on top of. I had enough buttons to interchange between these pearl and gold buttons that I had and had been dying to use, and the gold buttons that you just saw me paint. I love having them interchange, and I love that I have enough. but I did feel that the first measurement I made for the distance between the buttons was too small. So what I did was I moved that first button. So instead of an inch down from the top of the dress, it was a half an inch. And then after that first button, I put 2.5 inches between each button. And I feel like that was the perfect distance between them. I didn't want the buttons to go all the way down to the bottom of the dress, but I was happy with how far down that was bringing them. And then I got to sewing the buttons on, which again, very long, very boring time lapse. So I'll just give you the highlights and you can continue to admire my work and this very cute button panel that I made that I think gives the buttons an element of looking real, even though they are fake buttons. And I'm very, very excited to show you the finished product of this dress. But first, we gotta make the bow. So for this bow, we are using excess fabric from the jacket. We are pinning down this sort of eyeball-shaped piece of fabric. There are 2 layers of fabric on top of each other. So I'm pinning it down, I am cutting off the excess, and then I'm going to sew along that chalk line that I made. Just like those tubes of fabrics that we use to make the straps on the jacket, we are sewing this inside out and we are going to turn it right side out. So the seam along the top, I just did 1 continuous seam, but then when I did the seam along the bottom, I left a good amount open in the center of this eyeball shape. And through that hole is where we are going to turn the fabric right side out, which I'll show you that now. And once it is right side out, we did close up that seam, but it's going to be covered with the center part of the bow that's going to bunch this together and make it look like a bow. So I made this little strip of fabric. I closed down the open seams so that they would be on the inside. And this is what we're going to wrap around the center of the bow to give it a bow shape. So we need the main bow fabric, the centerpiece, and a hair tie. The next step is to pleat the bow, which I showed you the pleating method here. You're making an accordion out of the fabric. Then you are going to roll that centerpiece around the center of the pleat. It took me a few tries to get that centerpiece sitting exactly where I wanted to. It was probably a little bit too long and didn't need to be able to fold over itself this many times. But essentially, I wanted the open part to be on the bottom of the bow, and when I got it in a good place, I rolled it around the bow with the hair tie stuck in the center. Then I closed off that open seam so that all the pieces would be fitting together, and then I just double checked that that open seam was going to be on the bottom of the bow, and the top of the bow was gonna look so cute. Look at this. I've never made a bow before, so I was pretty excited. If you're interested in seeing the wig styling tutorial, I posted a short to my channel explaining how I did that, and so I will leave that in the cards if you're interested. Otherwise, it's time for the final reveal. So much for joining me for this cosplay thrift flip. I was in the process of revamping my Tifa Lockhart cosplay. Tifa is also from Final Fantasy VII. Hint, hint, you might be seeing that tutorial next week. And that is what gave me the idea to tackle Aerith. Such a great character and one I'm so excited to have in my collection. And if you are enjoying the content on this channel, from cosplay to horror to sci-fi and so much more, if you're a geek of any kind, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment down below what you thought of this video, and check back very soon for a brand new video. Lastly, I'd like to thank my Platinum tier patrons, Dale, Lars Baker, and Brett Muraski for your continued support. I appreciate you so much. My name is Leah, and I'll see you soon. Peace out.
Let it go. Auto puts her like, whoa. Think I go. Push it over. I see. 한여름에도 난 겨울 너와 있을 때 I swear 제가 먼저 zero 폭설한 게 chill day 꿈에도 I wasn't dumb 나만 빼고 넌 모두에게 참 친절해 배신감이 들어 단판이 돼도 머릿속을